Good evening, dear friends. My name is Nya, and I have the joy and the distinct honor of welcoming you here tonight. In Vietnamese, there's a saying that we're often taught, which is uống nước nhớ nguồn, which means when drinking water, remember your source. And so we want to just invoke a heart of gratitude for Thai for bringing us together in this moment. Tonight, as we explore conversations about cultivating joy and togetherness, even amidst times of trouble and hardship, let us acknowledge and let us recognize together the first source of joy, which is our togetherness. And let us rejoice in the collective energy of the beloved community. Tonight, our conversation will be shared between Jo Confino, who is a coach and a spiritual mentor. And it will be shared also between Brother Phap Huu, who is a Zen Buddhist monk, a longtime attendant of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, and also the abbot of Plum Village. And we have a special guest with Ocean Vuong, a Vietnamese American poet, essayist, and novelist. So please join me in welcoming Brother Phap Huu, Jo, and Ocean to the stage.
Dear friends, welcome to this latest episode of the podcast series, The Way Out is In. I am Jo Confino.
And I am Brother Phap Huu.
And we are sitting together with 1,000 people in Euston, central London. And we're here to talk about joy and togetherness in the midst of hardship. And who better than our special guest, Ocean Vuong. Ocean, you're very welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for having me. It's a deep, deep honor.
Okay. And before we get into the talking, we want to get into the presencing. And everyone has arrived here, probably having had busy days, and maybe lots on your mind. And what we want to do is to be present for each other and to recognize that actually, as we sit here, we are one community. We're, as Thai would say, one organism, one body. And to help us to get into that place of letting go of the busyness of your day and just being present to this time together, I'm going to invite Phap Huu to bring us together and to bring us into our common center so that we can all be here for each other.
So dear friends, I invite us to find a comfortable position, possibly if our 2 feet can be firmly on the ground, having 3 points of contact, our buttocks and our 2 feet firmly on this earth that is supporting us. In this moment, we can close our eyes or just keep our eyes focused in front of us where we are not looking left and right, up and down. And start to arrive in the feeling of the body. Whatever sensation is there, just acknowledge it. Allowing us to fully bring our mind home to this body. As you breathe in, just recognize this is an in-breath. As you breathe out, know that this is an out-breath. Just recognizing in-breath and out-breath. If the breath is short, just let it be short. If the breath wants to be longer and deeper, Allow it to be longer and deeper. As you breathe in, don't think about the breath, feel the breath, following the breath from the beginning to the end. This is in-breath. As you breathe out, you are fully one with out-breath, from the beginning to the end. I fully take refuge in my in-breath. I fully take refuge in my out-breath. As you breathe in, become aware of your whole body sitting here. As you breathe out, with each out-breath, relax more of the tensions that are there in the body, just by acknowledging and giving permission to relax. In this moment, you are here for yourself. We don't have to be presenting ourselves to anyone. Just allowing ourselves to be fully in the body. As you breathe in, aware of the body. As you breathe out, maybe offer a gentle smile. The smile is the smile to life, to this moment, to the stillness that we are experiencing. Aware of body, smiling. As I breathe in, I allow myself to be in this stillness. As I breathe out, peace is in my heart, in my body, in this very moment. How precious. I listen. This wonderful sound of the bell brings me home to the present moment. I listen. This wonderful melody of my breath guides me home to my body. Thank you, dear community, for breathing together and meditating together.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Phap Huu. The talk is called Joy and Togetherness in the Midst of Hardship, and often we find that joy and togetherness only in the midst of hardship. And each of you coming here this evening will have hardship of one sort or another in your life. And also there's the collective suffering we're seeing in the world today with climate change and biodiversity loss and war and famine and inequality, etc., etc. So it's really, really important that we, rather than getting sort of overwhelmed with grief and fear, is that we come back to our center and find at this moment real community and real joy. And this morning when I woke up, there were two images that came to my mind. One was the satirical film Don't Look Up, where there's this meteor coming to Earth and the human folly of not stopping it. And at the last moment, the people who were trying to save the world just meet for dinner. And they just have this space together to find this community, this togetherness, this presence over a meal as the earth ends. And there was another image that came to mind, which is Phap Huu, which is in our new book, Calm in the Storm, which is a poem by W.S. Merwin called Place. And I'll just read you a line from that. It says, "On the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree. What for? Not the fruit. I want the tree that stands in the earth for the first time, with the sun already going down." So before we get into the hardship, let's get into this connection, which many of you will not know, between Ocean and Phap Huu. So Ocean and Phap Huu were born in the same small village in Vietnam. They are both second-generation immigrants into North America. They are both in their mid to late 30s. And what very few of you may know is that just if one or two conditions had shifted, that Ocean may have ended up as a monk in Plum Village.
It could still happen.
So I checked in. Phap Huu says he's very welcome. So Ocean, tell us a little bit about this journey that almost happened.
Well, yeah, it's a delightful surprise to realize that we were from the same village, and the village is very small, a little shrimping village. Shrimp and rice was the major production, and just a year apart. So we might have shared the same water, the same air. So karma is a thing, right? In the West, we often say karma is a bee, as a kind of revenge, but it's important to say karma is action. Karma is occurrence, and there's so many occurrences that led us to share the space and now meet each other. I believe I've been meeting you for hundreds of years, perhaps all of us, and it's good to see you again. I guess, samsara is the condition that we're all in, the condition of suffering and dukkha. And I think growing up in Hartford, Connecticut, post-industrial Hartford, Connecticut, it was no longer the Hartford of Mark Twain and Harriet Beecher Stowe or even Wallace Stevens. It was the Hartford of the crack epidemic, of a blighted community. The Reagan era trickle-down economics never manifested for us. And then when I was about 14, 15, the opioid epidemic hit us like this plague. And except it didn't have a term at that time. Politicians weren't using it to build a base or to build their brand. It was just wiping, and it was wiping people out who were like lunch ladies, moms. And there was so much shame around those deaths because it felt like everyone was a junkie who were dying. We didn't know what it was. And you would see folks get cremated overnight and then vanish. Families would move. And it was at a time before the iPhone, before social media, or on the cusp of it. I think the millennial generation is very interesting, the further away from its epicenter of those years, is that I think we were the first to live an entirely analog childhood and then experience the iPhone. And I imagine it's quite similar to the generation that experienced the T model Ford for the first time. Imagine riding a horse, a month prior and then being in a machine. And that's what it felt like. And so the grief and the sorrow was immense, but irretrievable. Like to this day, there are people who are gone who I don't have their photographs. I can't find them anywhere. And it starts to become this kind of private grief where their faces fade. And being in the midst of that as a 15, 16-year-old, I guess I turned to the Dharma, to Buddhism, because I saw it in my living room. But my elders didn't really engage with the philosophy. They did it more as a cultural act, a kind of ritual. And I said to my mom, why are we putting fruit before the statue until it rots? There's fruit flies, like what is this? And my mother was like, I don't know, I think it'll help us with our income, as a kid I was like, all right, I'm not, it does not triangulate. It's like the math meme lady, right? I was like, okay. And then I said, okay. And then I was just thrown into so much suffering. And I guess as a child, there's a kind of naive questioning of like, why? And I asked my mother, I said, Mom, can I please go to the temple? And there's something really interesting with being a Vietnamese person in the diaspora, is that often for many of us, the temple or the church or what have you is the only place where we hear Vietnamese at the most longest unbroken duration. Whereas this experience would not be an experience for someone native in Vietnam. They would hear it all the time. So the temple was the only place. And so to this day, the Vietnamese language to me elicits this collective desire to heal and understand suffering. And it's a very specific to the immigrant. It's what I call a third culture. It's a third culture. There's nothing like it in the homeland. There's nothing like it in the assimilated American ethos. But there's this kind of a special place, this thing that displacement and violence created. And we think of the image of the lotus, this beautiful thing, this beautiful pink flower coming from the mud. And similarly, my lotus was being able to hear Vietnamese at its most capacious, nuanced, rich, and elongated every Sunday at the temple. And that's when I started to go. And the first book my mother bought for me was a book of the Dhammapada, the Buddha's words, at Barnes & Noble. And I remember she was so intimidated by the bookstore, its immensity. It's full of books, this thing that because she was illiterate, she was so sealed away from, that she said, go in and find what you need. Here's a $10 bill. Go in there and get what you need. But I can't go in with you. I didn't know it then, but I think what she was feeling was a deep sense of shame. But despite that, she knew that this was going to be a future, a kind of access to knowledge. But that was kind of the root, and I went really hard. And one day I asked my guidance counselor, I said, I know you're supposed to try to get me to go to college, but I want to be a monk. And I've already looked it up. There's a school called University of the West. And it's a school in California where it was a Buddhist school, similar to a Catholic school, but it was all around a liberal arts school around Buddhist education. And I figured I could go there, get a degree, and then become a monk, start my education. But it wasn't accredited. So the guidance counselor said, I would love to help you become a monk, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I sent you there. So you're going to go to a community college down the street. And then from there, I got hit with Baldwin, Foucault, and Benjamin, and then I never turned back. It was very interesting because the school was accredited only 2 months after that conversation. Because I remember asking him, I said, can you look this up? He turns on his Dell giant computer at the time. He's like, no, can't. It's not a real school, But that was just 2 months later. And so I would have probably made my way following the Vietnamese language to Plum Village. In fact, I'm sure I would, because my mother was listening to tapes of Thich Nhat Hanh at the time. And I think she would have been really proud if I chose that. But I asked if Thầy Phap Huu can recite a Vietnamese mantra, just because of all that. Again, the Vietnamese language to me is so close to this aspirational desire towards understanding suffering and collective healing. And again, that's not something I would say to represent Vietnamese in Vietnam, but something specific to Buddhist Vietnamese in the diaspora.
I think that was an invitation, Phap Huu.
And I will accept it. And just to share before I offer this chant, as Ocean invited me to offer this, I think in English more than I think in Vietnamese. And part of my journey in life was discovering who I am. I grew up in Canada and very much in a white world. And part of my thinking and my thought of success and happiness wasn't really what my ancestors taught me. And when I came to Plum Village for the first time, I was very moved by the collective kindness that was there, and it felt like home. And I'm staying in a house with a Sangha member that's housing me before this podcast started, and every morning I get to see the son go to school and come back home, and it reminds me of my fear of school. And the only place that I felt safe was actually Plum Village. And karma, nghiệp, like suffering brought us to the Dharma. And in Plum Village, when I first entered, I was 13 years old, young, and I touched a kind of kindness that I've never touched before. And I asked myself, if I could be a kind person, I think I'm good. I think I'm gonna have a career of offering smiles. And because I grew up not surrounded by smiles, it was a lot of hardship, it was a lot of striving. And in Plum Village though, I had to accept the Vietnamese culture, which was very difficult. Because going to school, my mother would make me a lunchbox, fried rice, but I wanted Wonder Bread. I wanted to be seen as equal. So Plum Village, or Buddhism, as Ocean has shared, is, for me, I didn't know that it was part of my identity until many, many years later. And as a monk, we have to learn to chant. And I first just chanted in English, because a part of me was rejecting the Vietnamese side. And only as I continue to accept what this robe means for me. This robe, it represents freedom. It represents we have a choice to take the steps that we want to make in this life, to have the actions that we choose to enact, to pass down to this present moment community and as well as many generations down the line. And so I'm gonna chant a verse that is very close to my heart. It is a chant that we will recite in our minds before we invite the bell. It's a prayer. And this was one of our teacher's favorite chant. So I invite him in my heart in this moment, as he has helped me rediscover my own soil so that I can plant the seeds of my heritage. And very lucky that I have many seeds, not just from Vietnam, but also from Toronto, from France, from the UK, and now internationally with the community that I've got to be in touch with. And so as I chant this, it's also a prayer to all the suffering that is happening in this very moment that we are not ignoring as a practitioner. We send our prayers to Gaza, to the Congo, to the Sudan, to all the conflicts to all the genocides, to all the destruction, the starving children and the mothers that have to care for them. So I invite us as a collective to invoke this peace that we can bring in our hearts and into the world in this moment. Body, speech, and mind in perfect oneness. I send my heart along with the sound of this bell. May the hearers awaken from forgetfulness and transcend the path of anxiety and sorrow. Ba nghiệp lặng thanh tịnh, gợi lòng theo tiếng chuông. Nguyện người nghe tỉnh thức, vương thoáng nẻo đau buồn.
Thank you, brother. I just want to pick up on what you said about kindness. That you came because actually you saw the value of kindness. And Ocean, I know this is central to your writing and the way you see the world. And just today, at lunchtime, I was in a restaurant with my wife, Paz, and the waiter who came to see us, to serve us, I could immediately see that he was a very kind and attentive man. And I just said, which I often do, I just wanted to let you know that I can see your attentiveness and I can see you're very kind. And his face just lit up. And he was so deeply appreciative. And sometimes, Tai said, just a smile can save someone's life. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about why you think kindness is so much at the heart of, in a world where often now we're seeing increasing cruelty, and where kindness feels that it's becoming a rarefied rather than something that is expansive.
Well, I think our world is getting much more disparate. We're becoming further and further apart. Technology was supposed to bring us together, and this was kind of the promise of the Enlightenment that, and it's interesting that all technological movements or renaissance are controlled by the wealthy and the elites. And so I think what I'm interested as a writer, as a teacher, is that so much of our world is about material resources and narrative. And this is why I tell my students, I said, they shame you for being a poet, for being a writer. Oh, you're doing this liberal arts, navel-gazing, decadent thing, dreaming. But the politicians and the elites are poets too. The greatest political speech is the anaphora. Walt Whitman used it as a catalog, but you hear it. We will heal the working class. We will heal the great divide. We will heal this country's heart. We will heal the middle class. And the anaphora is so useful because it doesn't have to explain itself. It just it launches again and again. And you think about, all the riffs, right? The greatest moments in political speeches are the pathos. Rarely do you hear facts and figures. It's the three classical Greek modes of argument: logos, ethos, and pathos. And it's always pathos. Unfortunately, we are a species that has evolved to hear the cry of our neighbor rather than move for facts and figures, right? Although we are not unmoved by that, it takes a lot for us to kind of comprehend that. We evolved in these tribal, smaller circles. And so I think narrative is deeply important. But if you look at how history progresses, it's often kings and queens from the Enlightenment procuring or being, solicitors of technological advances. And it was promised, the narrative is that it should liberate us. It should promise to free us from our conditions. And of course, it did free Europe from an agrarian system, but it only freed mostly white men. Then it exported that to the colonial South, to the global South through colonialism. And then, we plundered and destroyed the natural resources. And so all that technology led us where? It led us to mustard gas, trench warfare, the machine gun, gas chambers. It led us to social media, which depletes our dopamine, which leading to the highest youth suicide rates we've ever seen. And so something has gone awry. And I think kindness is difficult now more than ever, because I think kindness is something that is deeply dependent on its proximity, our proximity to suffering. It's harder for us to comprehend suffering now. Schadenfreude is in our hands, and it's always easier to see. We've normalized suffering so that we've been disassociated from it. And I think growing up in these communities in Hartford and working in fast food and working in the farms, I don't want to romanticize it, but I think I did notice that kindness and generosity was very easily mobile. It was easily shared. And I think part of that was because everyone in that community knew that they could be next. There's a moment that I think about when I was working in Boston Market. There was one of my coworkers, she was a woman in her 30s. I was just, 17, 18. And she got this horrible call that you don't want to get at work on a landline, and she said the call was from her aunt saying, your brother is overdosing and he's in the hospital. And this was before Narcan, and it was really interesting because how it would work is that there was some use of naloxone medicine, but it was not prescribed by the FDA. It wasn't approved as a nasal spray, but it was still there. And so some ambulance crews would kind of MacGyver it and put it into an etherizer. And so it's called off-label use. And so they experimented, but whether you lived or died really was Russian roulette. It depended on which ambulance crew came who knew about this. So, and everyone kind of knew. They're like, oh my gosh, who's going to come for my brother? Is it, the EMS that knows this or don't, right? It was kind of the wild, wild west of overdose care. And she, but meanwhile, we're closing down the store. We're trying to just kind of push through and wipe down the counters. We close it down, we're ready to go, and something that I think I'll take to the end of my life, this image. We didn't say a word to each other, but all of us kind of knew that we weren't going to go home. We clocked out, we're not going to get paid, and we're just standing around her in this dark dining room, just the back fluorescent lights in the kitchen lit. And I was a kid, so I just followed my elders, and most of the people were in their 40s and 50s who were working with me. And we just kind of decided that we would hold vigil over her. And I just thought, gosh, these people have family. They want to get home. They want to get out of there. Why did every like it was 8 of us, why did we all stay? And I think I've been thinking about that for almost 20 years, and I think it's because every single one of us knew that on any given day, we could be where she is. We could be where her brother is. We could be where her aunt is. That the proximity of our lives to suffering meant that we would be in a position where we also need people to stand next to us. And I think as our world gets more and more diffracted, as we get further and further from kinetic contact, because in that workforce, we had ideological differences. I knew there were people in that room that thought me as a gay person would be burning in hell. And yet, kinetic kinship degraded ideological differences. When you're working through a shift to collectively move towards a common goal, to survive together, you start to see your coworker sweat, and the locket that she's wearing that's slick with sweat after the 6 hour of a grueling shift is Mother Mary and her grandmother. You know, it's really hard to hate each other when you have shouldered labor, which is why in my work I'm always interested in labor. It's something that has really moved our world, and it's to be in the UK, to be in Britain, you know, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which meant it was also the beginning of the worker strike, right? The workers' rights started here, and it was a group of people making the very humble terry cloth. It was the first moment where folks, you know, revolted, walked out of factories and called for their rights. And so I think labor is something I'm always thinking about, not just a political thing, but as a narrative force. Like, what does it mean for a group of people to understand each other's suffering so deeply that they would surrender comfort, surrender the easy thing in order to hold vigil for one another? And I've always felt that it's the proximity, which is why, you know, my latest book is also about addicts. And in the course of that book, I knew that I wanted to write a book wherein the main character never gets better, because there's a moral discrepancy in addiction that we often think as someone gets more and more sick that they're somehow a worse person, that they're morally condemned. Whereas someone with an illness like cancer, right, if they fight that battle, even if they lose, it's a virtuous battle. But for the addict, it's always maybe they deserved it, or they're rubbish, or what have you. But I've experienced addicts as they lose sight of their life. You actually, their understanding of kindness and how important generosity is actually goes up. Or there's a kind of extreme difference between those two things. It's almost an inverse pattern. And so I think it's hard with ChatGPT and technology. We can go on, but I think there's a lot that is uphill. And again, it's the narrative. We were sold this promise, and a lot of it is from elites who benefit, technocrats who benefit from us willingly surrender our rights to them in order to give us a utopia, a heaven on earth that never materialized, in fact, a continual hell. And so I think it's so important to think about narrative. I talk to my students, you're a poet, you're a novelist, but you're under the mantle of wonder, bewilderment, curiosity. You know, those in power are also poets. They're manipulating meaning, but they're manipulating for votes, for profit, for power, towards fascism. And no wonder it's designed for you to be ashamed to be an artist. It's so interesting, isn't it, that in the art world, we're often asked to be humble, to be grateful for a seat at the table, perform humility. And I think humility is good. As a Buddhist, I believe in it. But there is a discrepancy between the artists. We never tell people on Wall Street to be humble. You never hear someone say, you know what, we killed it last quarter. Let's tone it down and be grateful that we have a seat at the economic table. You never hear the board of Raytheon say, let's lower the blast radius of our next drone striking model. Let's make sure the automatic rifle sprays just a fewer bullets because the last school shooting was so effective in our weaponry. You never hear humility in the death machine. And yet, so much of the upper middle class art world demands humility of the artists, right? Controlling that kind of ambition so that it's absolutely minuscule. And yet, there's open reign in linguistic registers, but also profit and death machine. In fact, we praise it, right? Anything that grows has this ultimate libidinal power we innately celebrate in and of itself. And it's important just to draw attention to that and not see these values, these discrepancies in valuations as a given, but to question why they are and the historical sort of lineages that led to what we're seeing today.
Thank you, Ocean. And also, there's the proximity of labor, and then there's the proximity of nature, which is also important. And as we were talking, it brought to mind, a couple of years ago, I co-facilitated a 4-day conference on collapse, of civilizational collapse with 150 of the world's experts on the polycrisis. And it was very intellectual. And actually, I didn't feel very much, even though we were talking about things that were so serious, because it didn't touch me. And I got home to France, and it was in the middle of a heat wave, and we have a small pond, which I often sit by and look at the frogs and the newts and the dragonflies, and it had dried up. And because it was so hot. And I felt so much grief that I hadn't felt when we were talking about the end of civilization.
Right.
And it's because I was present to what was there right in front of me, and I felt the absence in a way that I couldn't do in my mind.
Wow. Tai, can I ask you, what was the moment? Was there a moment where you knew that you were going to be a monk? That's not in the usual wheelhouse for someone raised in the West. Fireman, police officer, doctor.
Movie star.
Yeah.
Hockey
Was
player.
this plan B when Hollywood wasn't calling?
Yeah. Yeah. I fell in love. It was as simple as that. I came to many retreats, and in the years that I've gone to Plum Village, I've been hearing Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh gives hours of Dharma talks, which most of it I fell asleep in. But it came through somehow. I think most of us growing up, we want to have figures that we look up to. Superheroes, right? I grew up loving Wang Fi Hung, before Spider-Man and Batman and so on. And I think when I came to Plum Village, the robes and the bald head, the bald and brown were my superheroes. And every time I left the retreat, I would cry because I knew I was going back to suffering. And Plum Village was like, it is my home. It is my community, and we're not perfect. Like, there's so much that we're still figuring out. Like, we are made of humans, and one of the shared truth is we all suffer. We all have jealousy, we have hatred, we have discrimination among each other. Imagine 50 monks brought up in different culture, different education, those who can read, those who can't read, and we're learning to be in harmony. And that's a huge commitment. Most of us, we live in a room of 4 monastic, and we have a common space. If you leave your chocolate bar there and you come back and it's gone, you can't be angry. Because you're in harmony. But there's many people that are angry. Which one took my chocolate bar? Hunt down the monk's resident, look through the trash can. These are all true stories, by the way. I only speak direct experience. And when I came to Plum Village, why I fell in love with it was because I did see suffering. And I got to listen to suffering. And I listened without judgment. They were teaching us to listen and not try to solve it. That was a miracle. Because most of the time when we are asked to listen, I always have this feeling, okay, I have to try to fix you now. It's almost like a give and a take. And most of our life through capitalism is a give and a take, right? Yeah. So in Plum Village was the first, through the practice, it's not just a village, it's the practice of every individual learning to be accountable to their truth, which is suffering. In Buddhism, the first noble truth is suffering. That is something that we all will share. We speak about inclusiveness and equanimity in Buddhism, but we're not equal. Some of us are born in places where we have more privileges, in a particular race, in a particular situation, in a particular year. Mm-hmm. But what is equal is, as a human being, we're all gonna grow old, we're all gonna get sick, we're all gonna have to let go of what we think is permanent. And we're gonna learn to live deeply in the present moment. So as a young child, the same in my household, fruits, tea, and incense, right? Every morning, parents would tell us, light an incense before you leave your home. And I didn't understand that essence, and I thought it was very superstitious. Mm-hmm. I'm lighting the incense so I get an A+, so my mom is happy. Mm-hmm. And as I was getting D's, it wasn't working, so I gave up. And what you mentioned about, the understanding of suffering and the willingness to be there is interbeing, is this essence in Buddhism where we cannot be alone. We have this idea as individuals, we're gonna be successful by ourselves. Mm. Nobody is successful by themselves. And if we're unlucky, we will go through life, through pain, through suffering, just by ourselves. And that's where a lot of the deep longing for love is. And in a way, my heart that was looking for love, there was a plug. Mm. And that was the monastic community. And I've tried to explain it in many ways, but I think the realest answer was I fell in love and I can't explain it. Mm. It's like when you meet that one person or many people and you just like, I'm ready to suffer with them. I'm ready to experience life with them. I'm ready to go up and down with them. And I'm ready to be very selfless with them. Mm. Because becoming a monastic, you're letting go of all the individualistic way of being. I had to unlearn a lot. I had to unlearn so much. And before becoming a monk, they give us a trial period. It's like internship. Mm-hmm. Are you sure? And one of the monks, he pulled me aside and he's like, all right, I think you have a summer fling in this moment with Plum Village, but you're a guest right now and you're a child. You can wake up whenever you want. But if you want to be a monk, you're going to be waking up every morning at 5 o'clock. You're going to go through training. You're going to learn to unlearn many things. You're going to be away from your family. You're going to get ready to be of service for the world. And I felt that's my life. Mm. And because the practice is to dwell in the present moment, I knew that was it's a source of energy that I couldn't ignore. Mm. And my intuition was telling me to listen to my heart. And my heart was saying, let go of everything and be here. Mm. My mother was a big condition because I was so young, so our parents had to write a letter. My mother had a lot of fear because she knows in the culture that monastic life is not easy. I can smile like this because I've done a lot of work. Mm-hmm. I've endured a lot. Endured here as in not the struggle of the life as a monk, but endure here as in the wanting to leave also. Mm. There are so many crises that we had to meet as a monastic. We call it the maras, the inner demons that comes and you can't ignore it anymore. And the longing for love is a big one, intimacy. And I've discovered that in the spiritual world, there's a very deep intimacy that I have for the path, for the aspiration. We speak a lot about aspiration. And the aspiration gives a lot of joy, it bonds us as a togetherness. And we can renew our vows every day. And when I realized that this is what I wanted to do, I think my heart felt so light. And my spirit was floating, and I knew I'm in the right place. And my mother, after a long conversation, she said, if this makes you happy, Mother will support you. And I think for our mothers who were refugees, who gave up so much, I think their deepest wish is that we have a place where we can cultivate happiness. I think that is the deepest desire of many mothers, right? So I think when I was able to articulate that, my mother was ready to let go. And I was very lucky. My parents weren't very hard, because I have a lot of friends who have so much pressure from being second generation, all the sacrifices that our parents made, so they then imprint their wishes and demands on us. But I think my parents, I was more lucky. They're like, okay, you got space. Do what makes you happy, because we didn't have that choice.
Thank you, Phap Huu. Yeah. And Ocean, we had a brief chat last week. You said, and you mentioned earlier, that you started listening to Thai's talks because your mother was playing them on the cassette.
Yeah.
And you said one of the things you recognized was that suffering was a curative rather than to avoid it. And that we know that the whole of modern society is based on distraction and avoidance of our suffering rather than going into it. Right. And I just wonder if you can just talk a little bit about what was your experience then of listening to these tapes that were actually, as Phap Huu was saying, where Thai was saying actually, you know, our freedom is, when we go in, the way out is in and through, rather than try and work around it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know, going through is very antithetical to Western ideals, right? I mean, you know, a pharmaceutically induced pleasure as a kind of curing pain is a kind of hallucinatory, right? It's a hallucinogen. And it's similar to fast food. Fast food is a kind of sinister beauty because it's an industrialized promise of absolute replication of fulfillment, and yet it's a kind of poison as well, right? It, for the first time, it's kind of like the ultimate democratic ideal, sadly, that we can't have equality, income equality, or healthcare, but we can all eat McDonald's French fry, whether you're a billionaire or a houseless person, and it will taste the same. Likewise with Coca-Cola, etc. And in a way, it's kind of like the sinister capaciousness of the American dream, which is that you can all feel the same thing while you're all slowly dying. And I think, you know, what I started when I was in 2012. My uncle took his own life. He was 28. I was 24, and and he was my mother's little brother. And they were very close. I was very close to him. We were all in the refugee camp together. And I started hearing Thich Nhat Hanh's voice in the kitchen about 2 weeks after he died. And right away I knew she was looking for medicine, you know, and I stumbled upon a bit when he was talking. He says, Thich Nhat Hanh was saying, I speak to Vietnamese refugees differently than everybody else because their suffering I know very intimately. And so suffering then becomes method. Sadness becomes not just a feeling, but knowledge. And so to think about sadness as knowledge, as potential, and that anger even has an aftermath. And you realize the aftermath of anger is care. I was so angry when my uncle died. You know, I was so confused. Why would you do this? Why? And I wanted something, I wanted to do something. I had that very boyish desire. You know, the big trouble of masculinity is that we are not given the ability or the permission to feel and be vulnerable, but we are encouraged to have absolute agency. You know, it's incredible. It's a perfect storm of violence. Don't feel, don't interrogate, don't be vulnerable. But meanwhile, go get them, buddy, right? And I think, you know, it's not too hyperbolic to see why so many men lead to domestic violence, deadly domestic violence, lead to shootings, both themselves and others, right? You're given absolute agency. That's part of the idea of male privilege, is you're given absolute agency and yet denied a major part of your humanity, which is to feel, to be vulnerable, to be allowed to feel sad, to say, I need help, right? When you watch boys, they say incredible things to each other. I need him. I love him. And then somewhere around age 9 and 10, it's slowly or quickly beaten out of them. And so much of my American youth is to watch and to see my uncle go through this and myself go through this. And in his letter, many of which I'll keep privately, but there's one moment I think is worth sharing in his note, which he said, I'm so sorry, but I've just had enough. And we often want big reasons, dramatic reasons to step out of life, or big reasons to redeem life. This is what the movies say, the big epics tell us. Give me a big, big message. But in fact, I think, and especially for so many people who are working poor, it's really just fatigue. There's an ambivalence to life. And he was really just saying, I'm tired. I can't do it anymore. And I think my mother, rather than, you know, opting out of all this, turned to the only thing she knew, which was the Sangha, which was, and again, the Vietnamese language led her there, because where else, she was so sad and lonely, she went to the temple, and there's a little box where they had bootleg Thich Nhat Hanh DVD, CDs.
You can pay the difference now. It's not too late. There's a donation box on the front.
Yeah. Bootleg, they were burning masses. I'm sorry, but you know, they were like drawing on it, drawing a little lotus, like it was a whole economy. Vietnamese gonna Vietnamese.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember she buying these bootleg, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh tapes, you know, and meanwhile I'm buying bootleg 50 Cent, you know. At the same, this is 2003, right? Get Rich or Die Trying was, you know, but I think what was, you know, seeing that suffering and then Buddhism allowing us to kind of face it was so edifying. And I think that takes incredible amount of courage. And I think I would love to ask both of you, and I'm happy to talk about myself, but one thing we don't often associate Buddhism with is fearlessness. There's a lot of talk about togetherness, which is beautiful, peace, love, community. But what I saw in my mother and through my own Dharma practice was the capacity towards absolute fearlessness to confront who we are as people. And I'm reminded of the Roman poet Horace's credo, nothing human is foreign to me. And I think inside that willingness to look at suffering, and I started to understand that my uncle's commitment to that act, at the heart of it, after my deep anger, not at him, but at the situation of everything that led to that, I realized that suicide at its heart is still an act of hope. One does it with the immense hope of ending devastating suffering. And which is why I wrote, you know, my latest book about that. And I had a main character who steps away, God willing, steps away from the ledge. Because when you step away from the ledge, often society claps. We hear this in the news, these stories, but I always wonder, are they clapping for that person? Or are they clapping because normal, progressive progress has been restored? The bridge is opened, everyone can go on to their jobs and go on with normal life. Because the person who steps away from the ledge has stepped from that ledge right into a corner. They still don't have the answers. They have taken away agency. And I'm curious, what does day 2 look like for them? What does day 4, day 20? And I never got to ask that of my uncle. I never got to ask that of my friends who took their own lives. And I was curious of how to live, because I believe that it requires an immense amount of fearlessness and courage to live without hope, even the hope of ending suffering. To then choose life without hope is an incredible, fearless thing. And I'm just curious how fearlessness and courage functions in your lives as practitioners.
I'll start.
Yeah.
I think fearlessness is the essence of our teacher finding and founding of Plum Village. He was a young monk during the war, and he didn't run away from the suffering of the war, but he was finding a way to give compassion and love in the war. And I think a lot of times we may associate love and kindness in a more softer energy, but actually in my own practice of love, love is actually very fearless. And you have to have courage to love. Because when you truly love, you're ready to engage. When you don't love, you don't care. And mindfulness and the practice of the Dhamma, the true practice of the Dhamma is to put into everyday life. The moment we wake up, we have 24 brand new hours. I have a choice how I'm going to walk through this 24 brand new hours. With courage, with fearlessness, if I can cultivate it. And so for me, fearlessness is a very big layer of love and determination. And it is something that, for me, is not something that you practice and you get right away. And once you get it, it doesn't stay there forever. It's also very conditioned. We have to train it. We have to activate it. So for me, fearlessness, especially in our times now, is very needed. One of my biggest fears I don't have the fearlessness of Thai. But we have so many reminders to engage in that, and that is suffering. And suffering is everywhere. Suffering is everywhere, in our own hearts, in our own little families, in our communities. Do we actually take time to listen to one another? Have we resolved the conflicts that are still tying and draining our energies? And there's so many layers and levels of engagement that we make decisions every day. And there are days when I do have to cultivate also my joy and my happiness to nurture the fearlessness. If I'm angry only, like you said, like anger comes with a lot of care. It comes with a lot of compassion, actually, when anger is manifesting. But if I am not able to also recognize the joy and the simplicity of life, can I truly be there and engage with my fullness of courage? And joy, you have to have courage to be in joy. I've seen this so many times in Plum Village. Some people get so scared of the joy in Plum Village. And they hate it because they don't trust it. They don't trust it. Everybody's smiling at them. What the hell is going on here? People listening to them? I hosted a family. Family is what we do in our retreat. We do pods. So out of hundreds of people, it's scary to be in a community like that. So one of our spiritual technology is we create little families, Dhamma families, and we journey through the 7 days together. And you get, it's a wonderful moment of creating space to venture inward. A group may be 16 or 20 people, and you're gonna have full presence to listen to you. Are you ready to engage and speak to your own hearts? So fear and fearlessness and courage starts with oneself. Of course, it can be activated by what we see and what we are affected by globally, but there's also a journey for each one of us in this room to also ask, where are the places in my life that is lacking courage for me to meet?
It's so interesting that you said that we're living in a world where joy is suspicious, even for ourselves, right? But I think you're saying something that I've actually really clocked as a teacher. This is my 11th year as a professor. And I've had the great privilege of educating only Gen Z, from the very oldest to the very youngest. And in a few years, there'll be Gen Alpha, so they say. But what I've noticed is that, I talked about living in analog youth and then having a social, digital adulthood. But most of my students have their whole lives are in the digital world. And it has created a kind of surveillance system where they are so scared of humiliation, cringe culture, right? That everything is so cringe but they perform cynicism because it's safe, because cynicism is often misread as intelligence. And so they perform it, but they deeply hunger for sincerity. A few years ago, I was visiting a private school, and there was this young woman who you meet with them one-on-one for little sessions for looking at their poems. She was a brilliant young poet. And I asked her, I said, gosh, I think you could take this somewhere. You're gonna want to go to college for this or grad school? And she said, yeah, I'd love to be a poet, but it's kind of cringe. Sucks for me. But I said, okay, let's open that, let's interrogate that. And she started to feel safe because it was just us. She said, well, I do it, but I don't want to tell my friends. I work on it at home alone. And I felt so much sympathy for her. Like, here's someone who is smart, capable, passionate. And I'm like, but it looks like you're already all in. You took this class, you achieved to the point where the teacher selected very few students to come meet me. You're formally incredibly accomplished. You're well-read. I think you're already a serious poet. Why are you ashamed of that? And through that, she started to realize that it's effort is a kind of shame. Right? It's shameful to kind of believe in something, because to believe in something is to kind of be a fool. Only those who are doubtful are the ones who have thought of everything, right? And so we have that image of like the cool person smoking, disaffected. Oh, you still believe in that? No, I believed in that years ago, but now I'm over it, right? And so the greatest thing in the West is, the greatest error in the West is to be a fool. And the fool is someone who has believed in something so much that they have moved forward with absolute effort and optimism. And I think it's really debilitating our young generation, because it's not that they don't have desires and dreams. So many of them want to be the poets, but they're working on it alone, in loneliness, in isolation. And they're so scared to say, this is what I want, and I'm going to try really hard, failure or success to achieve it. And that requires a kind of fearlessness. But I think it's an uphill battle, because when I was little, if you are silly or naive or embarrass yourself, your classmates will give you a rough time. At worst, your school. But now, you're filmed, and an entire country from which you've never stepped into will laugh at you endlessly for an entire month. And at worst, you become a meme. And the meme is the most, dehumanizing thing, because your entire personhood has been warped into a medium of meaning for someone else's private group chat. You become a bridge, a utensil in another meaning making. So you're no longer a person, but for a kind of alphabet, right? That's now been utilized in other discourse. And your body has been kind of fully transformed into a civic function rather than a human being. And when you look at that condition, you realize why they are so stifled, because they are preserving their own humanity. And I think, the only answer to that is to give people permission, particularly in the classroom or in places of Dharma talks, to be able to be earnest and sincere with their desires, and to be okay with a kind of failure, to normalize that collapse of rigidity as a praxis, as a part of the practice. And it's really hard because we live in a cycle of linguistic abuse. Most of us live in a capitalistic world. And what you're told, everywhere you look, you step outside this room, and you'll see immediate language, an assault of language that tells you via advertising that your body is not good enough. You're not wearing the right clothes. You don't live in the right area. You don't have the right phone. You don't have the right car. You might not have the right skin tone. So all your life, everywhere you go, you're told that everything you are is not enough. And then the phenomenon of the 21st century is that you have talking heads on TV that you tune into, maybe to take a break or to catch up on the world. And TV news, going from Tom Brokaw, which gives this kind of update information, has turned into opinion news. And there's a really seductive, manipulative, again, narrative to this, whether it's on the left or the right, where you tune in from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., and there's a talking head building rapport with you. Whether it's, when growing up it was Bill O'Reilly, on the right it's Tucker Carlson, on the left it's like the SNL news segment. But it's really interesting that both of them weaponize humiliation as a rhetorical device. Humiliation becomes rhetoric. The interlocutor, the host, often would kind of wink to the viewer and saying, surely you are not as idiotic as these people I'm talking about, right? Surely you are superior than 50% of the population. Either it's the blue hair, woke, silly people who are privileged and whiny, or it's the MAGA, Republicans who can't even tell where Hawaii is or what have you, right? Both sides create alienation via a straw man effect, right? None of them are representatives of really any majority, but they're created to uplift the sense of superiority in the viewer. And if you were to tell a therapist, I'm living with somebody who all day tells me I'm not good enough, I don't look right, I'm not wearing the right clothes, but then for some reason, from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., they turn after dinner with their drink and say, you are the smartest person I've ever met. And in fact, you are smarter than half of the country. Nobody is as smart as you. I'm now inside the inside joke. And it's incredibly intoxicating. The therapist will say, you need to get the hell out. Because you are in an abusive relationship, most likely with a narcissist. And so many of us live in this ecosystem of abuse. And so it's not just young people, but adults too. So how humiliation becomes such a powerful tool, right? And it's a male-dominated discourse, right? No wonder when you look at political debates, regardless of how effective the substance is, what the message is, as long as your opponent can humiliate the other person, the audience will clap. The audience will always clap for the mic drop, whether it makes sense or not. And I noticed this during the first time I noticed was during the Bush-Gore. I was a a baby. But there was a moment in the town hall debates where Gore was feeling deeply upset about all the lies Bush was spewing, and he couldn't hold it, so he got up. Some of you might remember this. He starts to circle George Bush, in this kind of like standoff, right? And again, there's a kind of masculinist code here. I can't just let him go on and talk about me and I need to stand up for myself, Gore. And he comes close to Bush, and Bush does this kind of Clint Eastwood, up and down, right? And that was kind of the moment Gore's presidency was gone, right? Because he was so thoroughly emasculated through humiliation. And you see this again and again with multiple, and Trump is a master of this, right? Of ultimate stripping people of their humanity. And it's a man's game. Many psychologists doing multiple surveys would ask for women, what is the biggest fear? And it's often bodily safety, right? The biggest fear, bodily safety. And when they ask men, it's almost always a public shame, humiliation among peers, amongst community members. And it's interesting because for queer folks, it's both. It's doubled bodily harm and humiliation, right? But again, that proximity to suffering allows us a kind of understanding. Suffering and sadness becomes knowledge. Anger and sadness becomes knowledge. But I was deeply interested in that, and I think it's so interesting that you brought that up, even when we are at the heart of repair. When we have the wherewithal to say, I will go to Plum Village, I will buy the ticket, I will sacrifice economic time, my time with family to come here. Even when we are at the foot of self-healing, we have internalized this abusive relationship with language and shame for so long that even when happiness has mounted inside us, something about us still must reject it.
And you talk about sort of fearlessness. Where does that come from? Yeah. And you ask that question. In my life, my greatest fear was humiliation.
Wow.
Because I suffered humiliation as a child. And what I did as a result of that was hide away.
Wow.
Keep myself small, keep myself hidden, keep myself out of trouble, and play the fool.
Wow.
To get attention. And what changed it for me was in my early 30s, I was at a workshop, and without going into the stories, someone said, in general about somebody else, said, your gift is you can take people's pain, you can burn it in the furnace, and you can transform it into a blessing. Wow. And like Phap Huu described about, he knew, at that moment, I knew that was me. But what I realized was that to be able to do that, I had to purify myself. And that means I had to go to the darkest places in myself and become safe with them. Because it was only when I was able to do that that I was able to sit with anyone else and sit in there with them in their darkness. Not, as Phap Huu said, to try and save them, but to be present for them in that place and to have a safe space that people could face their demons and to know there was someone there for them. And in that sense, sort of Plum Village does that. It's a whole space. It's a refuge where people can share their deepest humiliations and know that it will be held with respect and dignity and love. And that is healing. And that I think for each of us, with so many people, when we experience someone in their suffering, we try and make it better for them, we fix them, we tell them it's not so bad, they'll get over it, because we can't face it in ourselves. And I think when we can face it in ourselves, then we can be present to someone. So what I discovered was underneath humiliation was my greatest strength.
Wow. Can you give an example? Do you mind giving an example?
Well, I'll give you an example which is around playing the fool.
Yeah.
Because in England, in ancient English history, the fool was a very powerful figure.
Yeah.
Because with the king or queen, he was the only one who could speak the truth without getting his head chopped off. So that from the fool being playing the fool in attempt to win attention, what I realized underneath that was this extraordinary power of the fool to drive change.
Wow.
So when I was, for instance, I was at the Guardian for 23 years, and I ran a project called Living Our Values, which was to transform the Guardian, bring it back to its core values, because they were getting lost a bit at the edges.
Yeah.
And the way I did that was just to play the fool, to use humor, to challenge the status quo in a way that wasn't threatening, but threatened them.
Wow.
And I've realized so much. Someone once told me that under our greatest fear is our greatest strength.
Right.
And that a part of our ego is we use that to hide ourselves.
Right.
But underneath it, if we find it, it is a strength that we can then share.
Wow.
But talking about strength, because I want to come back to vulnerability. Because Ocean, when I've heard you talk, what touches me deeply is your vulnerability, is your ability to take off the armor, to open your body and for people to see your beating heart. And one of the things I think people like about the podcast is that Phap Huu and I are vulnerable. You know, Phap Huu does not say, I'm the abbot of Plum Village, I'm on my pedestal, this is how you transform yourself.
Right.
Phap Huu shares about his pain and his suffering and the places where he sometimes loses his faith.
Yeah. Wow.
The places where he sometimes wonders, what am I doing this for? And it's a place where I feel very safe to be vulnerable, because I feel it's a place where actually it's a permission. It says, I offer you my vulnerability so you can share yours with me.
Well, that's a beautiful question. I guess, you know, this is probably part of my work that is the most informed by Buddhism, is that I don't really have this strong sense of Ocean Vuong as a static self. So in that sense, when I share things, I share it as a kind of, you know, in Buddhist ontology, you know, we are similar to clouds. A cloud looks like a thing that's there, but in fact, it's only there through conditions. There's a matrix of cause and effects that create us, our parents, meeting, history, war, violence. There's all these elements. And then, of course, stardust on a molecular level. And so the first thing Buddhism, I was a Buddhist before I was a writer, right? You know, if I didn't go to community college and found writing, I think I would have been a monk, right? And so for me, I approach writing as from a Buddhist perspective. And by the time I started to become a poet, I already understood that there is no self here. There's just experience. So when I think about vulnerability, I'm just sharing a human thing that I feel like anyone else, because I do believe in the universal. I used to reject the Cartesian and Platonian sense of the universal, where Plato believed that behind all of these forms, all of these illusions, there is a true form, right? There's something true behind what we see. And that is the universal, and it's fixed. I learned that Buddhist universality is very different, and it's that everything, the universal is already here, but it's just channeled through the filter called self. So then I start to realize, oh, everything I feel is already universal. It's already felt before me, it will be felt after me, and it's probably felt simultaneously. So if I experience, you know, my uncle's suicide, or the vulnerabilities and the deep vexations that I write about, these are not Ocean Vuong's feelings. This is not Ocean Vuong's sort of package, right? To me, it's like, oh, this is stuff filtering through. And if I can share it and put it in the center, the way all of us put our things in the center. I do this in the classroom. I say, please do not correct each other's work. You don't get to do that until week 4. And there's a very important part of that, because so much of our thinking of education is about reforming something until it's perfect. This, again, comes back to the Enlightenment, the idea that we can have a absolute telos towards linear progression, and that the classroom works like a conveyor belt of perfection. But what happens is that we start to map on dogmas. You hear things like, oh, a poem shouldn't be like that. A novel shouldn't be like that. And immediately I said, well, why? Usually these ideas, these rules will collapse after 1 or 2 whys, right? So instead of correcting each other, the first 4 weeks, we just name what we see. What do you observe? What is this poem trying to do? What is it interested in? Is there a pattern with nature? Or there's interest in trees? Is it a sonnet? Oh, it's a broken sonnet. It's breaking itself at the 13th line. What does that mean? So we're just adding observations into the center. So by the 4th week, when suggestions come, they are curated exactly to the needs of the idiosyncratic poet. The rules that we thought we knew from past can no longer apply to this specific person. In the same way, you would never give advice to a stranger, canned advice to a stranger. You would only give advice to your friends. A different friend, different advice. Another friend, different advice. And so I think for me, it was about seeing that all this is part of the project and being fortified in it. You know, some people might say, wow, how can you be so vulnerable, Ocean? How can you be so charismatic? You know, talks and shows and all that. I was like, none of this is innate. I don't have these innate things, but I arrive on stage or at my work fortified. It's not charisma, it's fortitude. I am fortified by a kind of determination that I have the vouch. I've been vouched for by my family, by my teachers. Any goodness I have, any prize, any glory, or any good thing that comes my way, as Tai has reminded me, I dedicate to my teachers, my family, my friends who got me here. I stand here as someone who carries the faith instilled in me by my grandmother, my mother who's passed on, my uncle. All those people believed in me, so I owe it to them to do this with a kind of determined but also humble openness. That if I've experienced it, and if I could share it, and it could help someone, and if someone could, even just that openness. Camus says, writing itself is optimism because it's suffering shared. Even if you write about the darkest things, it is an optimistic fact because someone else will recognize it. And recognition is a democratic ideal because it means that one feeling could then be taken and collaborated with. I think that's ultimately my hope.
Phap Huu, this idea of, we're not set, we're part of a continuum of life. And ancestors is obviously very important in Buddhism. And you wrote, Ocean, a calligraphy.
I am a continuation of my mother, was a gift that I wrote for Ocean, because I think that I think love comes from a deep sense of gratitude also. And just before coming onto this stage, I always have a practice that becomes a part of my ritual when I come to a place that I'm going to give myself to in this space to 1,000 people. I have to enter into a space of non-me moment. And I see that this is not about me, but this is about everyone sharing this precious moment and how to water all of the good seeds in this moment. Because in the present moment, we're carrying the past also. Like, this truth has actually keep solidifying my work and the task that I get to do. I get to be of service. And sometimes it's very tiresome. Sometimes I'm on the crisp of burnout. But knowing that there's so much that we can transform for our ancestors is very powerful for me. As well as because in this moment of transformation and healing, it is not just for me. the transformation and healing is also for the future. And that gives me so much agency, and it gives me so much energy. Sometimes I ask, why am I wearing this robe? Why do I have to be guiding? It's tiresome. It's always breath energy, it's always presence energy. But how can we transform our suffering globally right now? And I always come back to this insight of our teacher, which is, we can't do this alone. That is the truth. And we need a collective awakening. And this collective is not just the living beings now. I also bring the past. There are so many ancestors, I always invoke them to be in moments of when I need courage, when I need inspiration, when I'm feeling deprived, when I'm not sure. How many moments do we have these moments where we're not sure? And many, many moments. I think most of us, we fake it till we make it, right? Yeah. But I have so many moments, but I always can come back to one thing, is that because we are alive, anything is possible. And that is trusting also the unknowing. And in the continuation work of the Dharma, where it's so beautiful and so deep, is that our happiness and our moments of peace that we all can cultivate is not ours alone. We have to do the healing so that when the trauma and the suffering also rise, we can be there for the suffering and the traumas that will continue to come. Yeah. So each and every one of us, we are in peace. Yeah. We know that there's wars, there are destructions everywhere. We can feel very powerless because sometimes I don't know what I can do. But what I could do right now is to nurture and heal the things that I have received so that when I'm ready, I can also be a holder of space for so much suffering. Wow.
Can I make one request, since that we're in this lovely meeting house of Quakers? Is it all right if we open it up to the audience to ask questions before we close?
So we only have about 7 minutes left. Okay. So
maybe one question?
One question.
Yeah. It would be, because we're about togetherness, it would be a shame to just talk amongst us. I think just having the query out would be really lovely. Does anyone? I see someone in the corner over there with a hand. Is that a hand?
Yeah.
Yes.
The microphone is coming. Just give it 1 second.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. My question is along the lines of accepting and sitting in suffering. When I really want to have my own, in my home, on my own meditation practice. But what happens when I sit down is that it hurts. My mind hurts. All the thoughts that probably I'm not thinking about in the day, they surface. And it makes me think, I don't want to meditate, but I want to meditate. So you talk about kind of accepting those places. I just wonder if you can offer any advice around how to sit with oneself. I don't know, I think you probably understand the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Phap Huu.
Thank you for sharing. There's a lot of practices in meditation, not only sitting meditation. And I think when I have so much agony and pain in me, I have practices where I would surrender myself. And there's this practice we do in our training. It's called touching the earth. And we would join our palms, and it represents our body and mind together. And then we'll bring it to our foreheads. In the Eastern culture, we see that in the forehead is all of our ancestors and everything that's happening in this moment. Then we bring it to our heart level, which is us. And then we just surrender. And we would prostrate, like our forehead would touch the ground, and our whole body would be on the earth. And there are moments when the pain and the suffering is so immense. Don't hold it to yourself. Take refuge in the earth. And I would lay my hands on the ground, and our teacher would tell us to open our hands. And this motion of opening the hands is we're not hiding anything, and we're surrendering fully. So we can also take refuge in the earth, for the earth to hold our truths with us. So these are something very concrete that we can do when these very strong emotion arises. And our teacher always encouraged us to develop walking meditation, as when we're angry and anxious, sitting still makes it worse. Take refuge in the nature if we have an opportunity, or just in life, and just to dwell fully in our steps. And we would say, this is my suffering, this is my suffering. So we're not pushing it away, but as we're practicing this and we're expanding ourselves to the world, there is another reality that's happening, is that, and there is life all around me. And we have to acknowledge that. Don't only fully rabbit hole into the darkness of suffering. That truth is always going to be there. Mm-hmm. And because there is suffering, there's also happiness. And we have to expand our vision and to touch that. And I think we have to do this collectively. We have to teach this generation now so that we don't become afraid of happiness and joy. And we have to reclaim the word happiness, as our teacher would say. Happiness is not la-la. Happiness is, I have a heart. I can see with my eyes. I can feel with my heart. I'm not pushing anything away. Mm. So these are different practices that I invite you to do, as well as sometimes our teacher has this book, it's called Conversation with the Buddha, and he wrote it as his own contemplation in practicing with suffering. And each contemplation, you can then touch the earth. And some of it, I'm sure it would touch our modern suffering. So sometimes we can use our spiritual ancestors' words, or we can write it, like Ocean shared, is our optimism, is our recognition to acknowledge the suffering, and then offer that as a prayer. Don't wait until the end of the year. Don't make it a New Year resolution. I think the practice is every day is an opportunity.
Thank you. And Ocean,
can I just ask, do you have anyone you care for?
What, in what context?
In your life.
Yeah, I care for people in my life.
Yeah. I assume, but I don't want to assume. I think for me, when I'm in that moment, I think it could be very simple, because it's sometimes the simplest, smallest measure is what leads us to a kind of amelioration of where we are until it comes back. Of course, suffering will come back. And I think when I'm in that situation, sitting down with suffering, and I can't get out, and I knew this meditation session is kind of gone. Sometimes you know before you even sit down. A very simple thing, this is based on Buddhist psychology, which believes that you can only feel one thing at a time. That even a sensation of simultaneity is actually a flickering, a constant flickering. And neuroscience, strangely, is now catching up. They're already kind of proving this idea that the mind has these delays, and a sense of simultaneity is actually a constant flickering. And then, strangely enough, most computers work this way, right? And it makes a lot of sense, because sometimes you hear stories about, the parents of serial killers, when they're going through their horrors and their trials, and the parents will say, but he was so lovely. He was a Boy Scout. He volunteered at the church. How did this happen? Or how did a father who was so devoted to his family one day take a gun and does the unthinkable? So a flickering, right? And it's almost like holding a ball. And if we believe in that, which it looks like science is catching up to that, you hold the ball of suffering. You hold the ball of me, my suffering, my pain. And the idea is that how do I put that down and pick up something else? And the easiest thing, and this is why I at the core of me, I believe in humanity, because it's really hard to convince people to go to war, historically. You need a lot of texts, you need a lot of airwaves, you need a lot of speeches to convince people to go to war, but very easy to convince people to stop war. Very easy to people to stop armaments, right? Difficult for folks who are in control to keep those up, but for the general population, if you ask people, do you want peace? It's quickly. So that gives me a little hope. We are trapped by those in power, right? We are held hostage by their nefarious needs. But if you ask the general population, most people would want peace. In that sense, it's very easy to turn your attention towards someone you care for. When you're deep, immense suffering, just whoever that person is, I want them to feel happiness today. They had a rough week too. Maybe it's your brother or sister or partner. They were so stressed about that email. I hope in this moment they can feel a little better. And I want to take all of the power of my suffering, because suffering is powerful, and then just give it as a force of love to them. So you're doing this exercise, and I do it all the time. And I realize after a while, I've dropped the ball of my own suffering, my own fears, my own selfishness, my pains, and I'm holding the person I love. And so you've turned the flickering. Because maybe before you sit down, it's like suffering, confusion, doubt, shame, suffering, confusion, doubt, blah, 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 right? It's just a system of suffering. And then you just pick up, my brother, I hope he has a good day. He's been suffering so much. He's been anxious. I'm going to give all my love to him, everything I have, all my strength. I'm going to devote it to him. And that alone is a meditation practice. 5 minutes, that's the whole practice. And if that's all you got, that's more than enough.
So Ocean, thank you for that. So we're really coming to the last 3 or 4 minutes, and we have to stop, otherwise they'll come and forcibly remove us.
The Quakers will come.
Interesting to forcibly remove 1,000 people, but
don't get them mad.
But just to finish off, because you mentioned earlier when we were just before we came on about the fact that you have a chant that you came up, that you sort of voiced when the opiate epidemic was sort of in full swing, and something that offered hope.
Oh yeah,
And so I just wonder if we can close this evening with maybe just very briefly explaining the chant, but then just in the same way we opened up with a chant to close it.
Well, during the, I came upon this hymn when I was a teenager, and we lost a lot of people, as I said earlier, to the crisis, and this hymn kept on recurring. So you imagine a bunch of teenagers, like it was so bad that like we would go to wakes like every 2 months. And we kept hearing this Appalachian hymn called Bright Morning Stars. And I was like 14 when I first heard it, and I've been carrying it with me all these years. And my country is in a lot of trouble right now, and maybe a lot of countries are in a lot of trouble, and I don't know the half of it. But I usually sing this, and I'm no singer, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time.
No humiliation.
This is humility. But I apologize to any professional singers in the audience. But I want to just offer this with this feeble, imperfect, damaged instrument. I tell my students this might look cute and well thrifted, but inside is a wasteland. Okay, but this is Bright Morning Stars, and I just dedicate it to the people who survived. And for some reason, it's a psalm that is filled with hope, but without looking away from deep, deep suffering. Bright morning stars are stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Day is a breaking in my soul. Oh, where are dear mothers? Oh, where are dear mothers? They have gone up to heaven, shouting. Day is a breaking in my soul. Day is a breaking in my soul. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to Jo and Brother Phap Huu and Ocean for such a rich conversation. Wow, there was so much to process. There was so much love, so much wisdom, so much rawness that we just experienced today. And you know, on a more practical note, if you love what you saw today, and you want to continue to support the efforts of building a more just nation, a more compassionate world where we, both us and our future generations, could love fearlessly and really experience joy unapologetically, please do think about or consider donating to Plum Village in support of what Brother Phap Huu called the bald and the brown, to do the work that they do. In the Buddhist tradition, there's the tradition of giving alms, and oftentimes you would drop things in the bowls of the monks, but now we have a modern twist in a form of a QR code, and if you walk outside, there's going to be card readers that you can happily tap your card if you'd like to offer alms in that way. But thank you all so much for your deep presence and for your love and for your care in holding the space together. May you all be well, and may you all be out of here by 9:30, please. Thank you.
The way out is in.